The scent of her perfume, faint and ghostly, still clung to the fabric of my favorite armchair. Sometimes I'd bury my face in the worn velvet, inhaling deeply, trying to conjure her back just for a moment. It was a futile ritual, one of many I'd adopted since the funeral. The world had gone quiet then, the vibrant colors of our life together leaching away, leaving behind a monochrome blur. Every morning, the silence in the house was a fresh wound, a gaping maw where her laughter used to be. My wife, Elara, gone, a sudden, brutal snatching. One day he was there, vibrant and full of life, planning our next adventure and the next. Nothing but an empty space beside me. The doctors had called it a massive cerebral hemorrhage. I called it theft. The universe, a cruel thief, had stolen the one thing that anchored me to sanity, leaving me adrift in a sea of grief so profound it felt like drowning. The condolence cards piled on the mantelpiece, a testament to a life that had ended too soon, too unfairly. Each handwritten message, each platitude felt like a fresh stab. They meant well, I knew, but their words were hollow, echoing the emptiness inside me. My colleagues at the firm had been understanding, offering an indefinite leave. But what was there to come back to? The spreadsheets, the client meetings, the relentless pursuit of profit, it all seemed meaningless, a pathetic charade in the face of such loss. I couldn't stay in that house, our house, not anymore. The antique grandfather clock in the hall, which Elara had loved, chimed the hours with a mournful precision that grated on my nerves. Her gardening gloves lay by the back door, still caked with a bit of spring soil. Her favorite mug sat in the dish drainer, waiting to be put away. Each detail was a barb, tearing at the fragile stitches of my composure. I needed to escape, to sever the tether that bound me to this suffocating grief. The solicitor's letter had arrived 2 weeks after the funeral, a morbidly timed delivery. My estranged grandmother, a woman I barely remembered, had passed away, leaving me everything. Everything apparently included a sprawling Victorian manor, nestled deep in the forgotten corner of the county, far from the city's indifferent hum. It sounded like a tomb, a desolate monument to a forgotten lineage. Perfect. It was exactly what I needed. A place to bleed out my sorrow in peace, a place where no one would expect me to smile, to pretend to exist. Packing was a blur of necessity. Clothes, a few books, Elara's worn copy of Wuthering Heights, the one she'd read so often the spine had cracked. Her favorite shawl, still carrying that elusive scent. I didn't look back as I pulled away, the tires crunching on the gravel. There was nothing left to see. The journey was long. A monotonous drone of engine and tires against asphalt. The landscape slowly shifted, the manicured lawns and bustling streets giving way to rolling hills, then dense, encroaching woodland. The road narrowed, asphalt dissolving into crumbling tarmac, then into a dirt track barely wide enough for one car. Trees pressed in from both sides, their branches gnarled and ancient, forming a perpetual twilight tunnel. My cell phone, which had been stubbornly clinging to a single bar for the last hour, finally gave up the ghost. No signal, just me and the endless green. A sudden cough from the engine, then another, more violent one. The car lurched, bucked, and then with a final shudder died. I tried the ignition again. Nothing, just a pathetic click. I tried a third time, my hand trembling, still nothing. My breath hitched. I slumped back against the seat, the reality of my situation settling over me like a shroud. Through the windshield, just a few yards ahead, stood a derelict structure, half swallowed by ivy and neglect. It was a cabin in woods, no cell signal, car won't start. A porch, rotted and sagging, leaned precariously. There was no smoke from a chimney, no sign of life, just the profound stillness of decay. I was stranded. The woods pressed in, a suffocating wall of green and brown. The manor, according to the solicitor's map, was still a mile or so further down this track. The track widened slightly, revealing glimpses of what looked like an old, crumbling stone wall, barely visible beneath a thick carpet of moss and ferns. It must be the property line. I pushed through a particularly dense thicket of thorns, my jacket snagging, and then abruptly the trees gave way. It was there. The manor. It loomed against the bruised purple of the twilight sky, a monolithic silhouette of gables and turrets, skeletal chimneys reaching like bony fingers. A grand, imposing front door, black and heavy, seemed to absorb the last vestiges of daylight. A wave of something unidentifiable washed over me. It was a weight, a palpable pressure, as if the very air around the house was thick with unspoken things. No birds sang. No wind rustled the ancient trees that ringed the estate. I walked slowly towards it, my boots crunching on the gravel drive that was mostly overgrown with weeds. I hesitated, my hand hovering. What lay behind it? What had my grandmother truly left for me in this desolate, imposing place? The silence of the house pressed in, a physical weight. It was different from the silence I'd known since her death, a profound emptiness that echoed only my own thoughts. This house, my grandmother's house, held a different kind of quiet. Watchful. I'd spent the morning staring at the peeling wallpaper in the bedroom, the faded floral patterns like ghosts themselves, before a flicker of determination, thin but persistent, finally roused me. I couldn't just exist in this place. I had to understand it. My footsteps creaked on the floorboards as I ventured out of the bedroom, each sound amplified in the stillness. The air was cool, carrying the faint, earthy scent of decay and something else, something metallic and sharp, like old blood or rust. The hallway stretched before me, a tunnel of gloom punctuated by closed doors. I opened the first one I came to, revealing what must have been a study. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the grimy window panes, illuminating a room frozen in time. A heavy mahogany desk dominated the space, its surface scarred by countless years and unseen hands. Bookshelves lined the walls, crammed with leather-bound volumes, their titles obscured by a thick layer of gray fuzz. I ran a hand over one, leaving a clean streak on the spine. It felt like disturbing a tomb. In a forgotten corner, tucked beneath a draped sheet, I found a stack of old photographs. They were brittle, their edges curled like dried leaves. I sat on a surprisingly sturdy, if dusty, armchair and began sifting through them. Faces, stiff and unsmiling, stared back at me from sepia-toned squares. There was my grandmother, younger than I'd ever known her, her eyes already holding that distant, unreadable quality. Beside her, a stern-looking man I didn't recognize, perhaps my grandfather. Other faces blurred into anonymity, distant relatives, long-dead friends. They all seemed to share a certain solemnity, a tension around the eyes as if they knew something I didn't, something heavy. The temperature in the room had plummeted. I shivered, pulling my sweater tighter. Old houses, I told myself, they have drafts. Then, the single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, which had been casting a weak, yellow glow, flickered once, twice, then steadied itself. Just the ancient wiring, I reasoned, the kind of thing I expect in a place this old and neglected. It had to be. I pushed the photographs back into their stack, their silent gazes unsettling me more than I cared to admit. The exploration continued deeper into the house. Each room was a variation on the same theme: dust, decay, and the ghost of lives once lived. A dining room with a massive, claw-footed table, its surface scratched and dull. A parlor with shrouded furniture like sleeping giants. The air grew heavier the further I went, the metallic tang stronger, almost a taste on my tongue. At the very back of the house, in a small, windowless alcove I almost missed, I found it. A chest. Iron bands secured it, culminating in a formidable lock, rusted solid. The carvings were strange, not like anything I'd seen before, almost organic in their twisting lines. I ran my fingers over the cold metal, then the rough, splintered wood. It felt ancient, imbued with a gravity that pulled at my attention. It was indistinct, like wind through dry leaves, but it held a human timbre, a low murmur just beyond comprehension. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Nothing. Only the dust mote still dancing, oblivious. My imagination, I decided, playing tricks on me, the stress, the grief, the isolation, it was all getting to me. I took a deep, shaky breath. I tried the lock, jiggling the rusted hasp, but it was unyielding. Whatever was inside was meant to stay hidden. The thought prickled at me. What secrets could such a chest hold, buried so deep within this decaying structure? By late afternoon, the house felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. I walked past the overgrown garden, a tangled wilderness of thorny roses and dying weeds, and made my way to the gravel driveway. My car, parked where I'd left it 2 days ago, looked forlorn. I climbed in, turned the key. The engine groaned, coughed, then fell silent. I tried again. I pulled out my phone, no bars, not even a single flicker. I was truly cut off. Here, in this isolated cabin in woods, no cell signal, car won't start. What was it hiding? And why did this house feel so determined to keep me here to find out? The silence of the house had begun to curdle. It wasn't the deep, echoing void I'd grown accustomed to, the kind that swallowed my own grief whole. It pressed in, not with emptiness, but with a palpable presence, a weight that settled on my shoulders, making my spine ache. I tried to work. A stack of boxes, filled with my grandmother's peculiar keepsakes, lay open on the dusty library table. A taxidermied owl stared glassy-eyed from a high shelf. Its gaze felt too keen, too knowing. I picked up a tarnished silver locket, its clasp stubbornly fused shut. My fingers traced the intricate floral pattern, a vague sense of unease stirring in my stomach. Was it the dust, or something else entirely? Then it started. It was too soft to discern words, yet it carried a cadence, a familiar lilt that caught in my throat. I paused, the locket heavy in my palm, and listened. Nothing, only the creak of the old house settling, the groan of ancient beams. I shook my head, dismissing it. Grief, I told myself, exhaustion. My mind was playing tricks. I returned to the boxes, but the feeling persisted. It was as if the air itself had thinned, making every breath a conscious effort. And then, clearer this time, a sound, my name, not shouted, not even spoken, but breathed. William. My hand trembled, dropping the locket with a soft clatter against the table. The sound echoed, loud in the sudden absolute stillness. Only the owl still staring. Hello, I called out, my voice sounding thin and uncertain in the vast space. I told myself it was the wind, the old house. It was a sensation, a phantom touch, light as a spider's silk brushing my cheek. A scent, too, subtle yet unmistakable. Jasmine and old paper, the very particular fragrance of my wife's favorite tea, the one she always drank while reading in her armchair. My breath hitched. That was impossible. He was gone. My throat tightened. I stumbled back from the table, knocking against a heavy armchair. It scraped across the floor, a jarring sound that made me flinch. Then I saw her, just for a flicker, a shimmer in the doorway leading to the conservatory. Her silhouette backlit by the faint, dust-moted light, perfectly formed. Her hair, the way it fell just so around her shoulders. The gentle curve of her posture. My heart seized in my chest, a violent, painful clench. Sarah. The name was a desperate croak. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. I took a tentative step forward, then another, my legs heavy, my mind screaming for it to be real, even as another part of me recoiled in horror. Just as I reached the threshold, the image dissolved. Not faded, not walked away, but simply unraveled, like smoke caught in a sudden draft, gone. I stood there, trembling, my hand gripping the doorframe so tightly my knuckles ached. My breath came in ragged gasps. My mind raced, trying to reconcile what I'd seen with what I knew. Grief. My mind, fractured by loss, was conjuring her. It had to be. There was no other explanation. I was losing my grip. The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I needed to get out. I needed to hear another voice, a living one, to ground myself. I fumbled for my phone, pulling it from my pocket. No signal, of course. The isolation I'd sought was now a cage. I bolted for the front door, my only thought escape. My grandmother's car, a rusted-out behemoth I'd inherited along with the house, was my only hope. I had driven it here, hours ago, the engine sputtering but holding. It had to start. I ran out into the dimming afternoon light, the cool air doing little to calm the frantic thrumming in my veins. The car sat a little way down the gravel path, nestled between overgrown rhododendrons. I yanked open the driver's side door, slid onto the cracked vinyl seat, and shoved the key into the ignition. I turned it, a choked cough, a groan. I tried again and again. The engine turned over reluctantly, each attempt weaker than the last, until all I heard was a dry click. The battery was dead, completely, utterly dead. My hands flew to the steering wheel, gripping it with white-knuckled desperation. I was trapped, deep in the woods. No cell signal, the car wouldn't start. A helpless rage bubbled up, quickly subsumed by a deeper, more primal fear. Then from somewhere inside the house, a sound. It was faint, almost imperceptible over the pounding in my ears. A melody, a lullaby perhaps, sung in a voice that was undeniably hers, yet subtly, terribly wrong. It was too thin, too high-pitched, like a child's music box winding down, forever out of tune. Was I truly alone in this cabin in woods? No cell signal, car won't start. Or was I already sharing this space with something that wore her voice, her shape, like a cruel, ill-fitting mask? "Hello?" I called out again, my voice thin and reedy, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the manor. My breath hitched. The locket lay where it had fallen, a dull glint on the polished wood. The owl, carved from some dark, heavy wood, still perched on the mantelpiece, its glass eyes unblinking, fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. I stood frozen for a long moment, my ears straining against the quiet, listening for anything, a creak of the floorboards above, the distant sigh of wind, the rustle of a curtain. Nothing. Only the steady, rhythmic thrum of my own pulse in my temples. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, pressing down on me. I tried to swallow, but my throat was suddenly dry. There was nothing. No one. Just the house, vast and silent, holding its breath. Grief, isolation, the sheer weight of this place, it was all getting to me. I had to get out. I walked to the window, pulling aside a heavy velvet drape. The world outside was a tapestry of muted greens and grays, the dense forest pressing in on all sides. A shiver traced its way down my spine. I knew without even trying that my cell signal was non-existent here. I'd checked it a dozen times since arriving. And the car, my old sedan, had given up the ghost 2 days ago, stubbornly refusing to turn over, a dead weight in the gravel drive. I was truly alone, marooned in this sprawling monument to my family's forgotten history. I knelt, picking up the locket. Its cool metal felt strangely heavy in my palm, a solid, undeniable weight. My wife's face, etched in the small photograph inside, smiled up at me, a ghost of happiness. I traced the curve of her cheekbone with my thumb. He was gone, and I was here. This room, my grandmother's study, had always felt different from the others. Less grand, more lived in, but with an undercurrent of something else, something I couldn't quite name. It was in the faint scent of old paper and something metallic, like dried blood, that seemed to cling to the heavy drapes, or perhaps it was just my imagination. I ran my hand along the edge of the antique mahogany desk, its surface cool and smooth beneath my fingertips. My grandmother had spent countless hours here, hunched over ledgers, writing letters, or perhaps, as I was beginning to suspect, battling her own demons. My fingers brushed against a section of the desk's side paneling just beneath the top drawer. It felt different, not quite flush with the rest. A subtle ridge, almost imperceptible. I pressed harder, my heart giving a small, anxious leap. There was a faint give. I traced the outline of a rectangular section, no bigger than my palm. With a surge of adrenaline, I pushed. A soft click echoed in the quiet room, startling me. The panel slid inward a fraction of an inch, then popped out, revealing a shallow, narrow cavity. Inside, nestled in the dust and cobwebs, was a small, leather-bound journal. I pulled it out, my fingers trembling. A few loose, yellowed pages fluttered to the floor. I picked them up carefully, my eyes scanning the faded, looping script. My grandmother's handwriting. The first legible entry was dated decades ago. Soft at first, like dry leaves skittering across the roof. Then closer, inside the walls. They know I'm alone, they know what I saw. My breath hitched. I remembered the faint, almost imperceptible sounds I'd heard since arriving, dismissing them as the house settling or the wind, but my grandmother, she'd heard them too. It demands its due, always its due, the pact. It binds us all, a terrible inheritance. They say it protects us, but it only consumes. My mind feels. Stretched, thin faces, a pact. What kind of pact, and what did it demand? The words twisted in my mind, forming grotesque shapes suggesting unspeakable things, not human faces. I gripped the journal tighter, my grip tight. This wasn't just a ghost story, not just the ravings of an old woman. This was something else. Something ancient, something deeply rooted in this house, in my family. Another entry scrawled almost illegibly near the back. The burden shifts. It always shifts from one generation to the next. I thought I could break the chain. I was wrong. It's too strong. It feeds on fear, on grief. It grows, and now it watches him. My William, no, I won't let it take him. I won't. My William, he was talking about me, my grief. It feeds on grief. They was that why the house seemed to press in on me, mirroring my own despair. The pact, my name, it was all connected. My grandmother hadn't just been old and eccentric. She'd been terrified, and she'd left me a warning. But what exactly was she warning me against? And what did it mean that the burden had shifted to me? The chill, colder than any winter wind, was still in the air, raising goosebumps on my arms. My grief, it feeds on grief. They was that why I felt so drained, so hollow, like a walk-through husk. They was that why the house seemed to press in on me, mirroring my own despair, exhaling its own long, drawn-out sigh of sorrow. The words swam, blurring into an indictment. I needed to leave. Now. Not another minute. My bag, already packed with the essentials I'd brought from the city, sat by the front door, a testament to my subconscious desire for escape. I grabbed it, the worn canvas strap digging into my shoulder. The front door groaned open, revealing a world painted in shades of bruised purple and gray as dusk bled across the sky. The air outside was sharp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine needles. A storm was brewing. I could feel it in the heavy quiet, in the way the ancient trees stood utterly still, holding their breath. Its engine coughed to life after a few strained turns, a welcome rumble that vibrated through the steering wheel. I reversed, the tires crunching on the gravel drive, and headed down the winding, overgrown path that led away from the manor. The trees closed in almost immediately, their skeletal branches clawing at the twilight sky. The road was a treacherous ribbon of cracked asphalt, barely visible beneath a carpet of fallen leaves and moss. Rain began to patter, soft at first, then growing into a steady drumming against the windshield, blurring the already dim landscape. The road, if it could even be called that, narrowed further, becoming little more than a muddy track. My headlights cut weak tunnels through the downpour, illuminating nothing but dripping foliage and the occasional flash of startled animal eyes. Panic began to prickle at the edges of my resolve. Where was the main road? Where was anything? Then, through a sudden break in the trees, a faint, flickering light. A structure. Hope surged, sharp and sudden. A house, perhaps. A place to ask for directions, to get my bearings. I swerved off the track, my tires sliding in the mud, and pulled up clumsily beside a small, weather-beaten building. It was a cabin in the woods, no cell signal, car won't start. I cut the engine. The sudden silence was absolute, broken only by the relentless drumming of rain and the distant moan of the wind through the pines. I tried to restart the car. Nothing. Just a weak, protesting click. I tried again. Another click. I fumbled for my phone. No signal, of course, but the light was on. The air here was heavy, thick with the smell of wet earth and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet like old blood. I approached the cabin, my boots squelching in the mud. A sound. So faint I almost dismissed it as the wind, but it came again. A low, mournful hum. A lullaby, her lullaby. The one she used to sing to herself when she couldn't sleep. A gentle, wordless melody that always brought a fragile peace to our nights. My breath hitched. My heart, which I thought had been beaten into submission by grief, lurched violently. It wasn't possible. He was gone. I pushed the door open further, a groan of ancient wood answering my touch. The cabin's interior was a single, sparsely furnished room, lit by the weak porch light filtering through the open doorway. Dust motes danced in the gloom. It was her, or it looked like her. The curve of her back, the way her head tilted slightly, the familiar sweep of her hair, even in the dim light. He was rocking gently, the mournful hum now clearer, fuller, though still wordless. A wave of indescribable relief so potent it made my knees weak washed over me. The rocking stopped. Slowly, oh so slowly, the figure turned its head. My breath caught in my throat. My blood turned to ice. It was her face, but utterly wrong. Her mouth, stretched into a parody of a smile, was too wide, too full of teeth that seemed too sharp, too long. Her skin, normally soft and flushed, was a grayish pallor, stretched taut over prominent cheekbones. And from her lips, the lullaby continued, but it was no longer mournful. It was a guttural, wet sound, a parody, a mockery. It was the sound of something drowning, choking on its own melody. Her head tilted further, an impossible angle, and a low, wet giggle bubbled up from her throat. It wasn't her laugh. It was a cruel, echoing sound that scraped against my eardrums. She raised a hand, thin and skeletal, not the soft hand I remembered, and beckoned me closer with a slow, deliberate curl of her index finger. It emanated from her. My wife, or this thing wearing her skin, was rotting. I stumbled backward, a choked gasp escaping my lips. This wasn't a vision, this wasn't grief playing tricks. This was real. This was a direct, malicious strike. It was here, it had found me. The figure in the chair slowly began to rise, its movements jerky, puppet-like. Its black eyes never left mine. The wet lullaby grew louder, more distorted, now interspersed with that awful, liquid giggle. Was it going to follow me? Was it going to speak again, twisting her words, her memories into something vile? What else could it do? The metallic sweetness, that cloying, undeniable stench of a butcher's shop left open to the summer heat, had solidified the nightmare. This wasn't grief. This wasn't a fractured mind. This was her, or the thing wearing her face, decaying. My wife. My beautiful, vibrant wife, now a horror. The air thickened around me, heavy with the scent of rot and something else, something I couldn't name but felt in my bones. It was a cold, quiet hum, a presence that pressed in, not just from the figure but from the very walls of the manor. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet, the floorboards groaning in protest. My breath caught, a ragged, useless sound in my throat. My vision swam, not from tears, but from the sheer, mind-bending terror. Get out. Get out now. The words screamed in my head, a primal, animalistic urge. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My legs moved on their own, a desperate, clumsy sprint through the echoing halls, past the portraits whose eyes seemed to follow, past the dust motes dancing in the faint moonlight that sliced through the grimy windows. I burst through the front door, the night air hitting me like a physical blow, sharp and frigid. My lungs burned. The gravel crunched under my frantic steps as I ran towards my car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped them. The engine sputtered, caught, then roared to life. I threw the gear into reverse, spinning the wheels, leaving divots in the damp earth, then slammed it into drive, peeling away from the house, the monstrous manor shrinking in my rearview mirror. I drove until the gas gauge flickered dangerously close to empty, until the first tendrils of dawn began to paint the sky a bruised purple, until my mind felt like a raw, exposed nerve. I found an old, dilapidated cabin in woods. No cell signal, car won't start. The air here was cleaner, though still carrying the damp scent of pine needles and decaying leaves. The car had sputtered its last mile just as I pulled into the clearing, the engine dying with a final, mournful shudder. I tried to restart it, twisting the key again and again, but it was useless. A click, a groan, nothing. I was trapped. No, not now. I had to think, I had to understand. The cabin's single window was grimy, cobweb-laden, but the lock on the door was surprisingly sturdy. A rough table, 2 chairs, and a narrow cot were the only furnishings. No electricity, no running water. Just me, the dying light of my phone, and the crushing weight of what I'd seen. I needed answers. I'd grabbed a satchel of documents from the manor's study in my panicked flight, old journals, brittle letters, a few leather-bound books that looked ancient even then. Now, huddled by the sputtering flame of a single candle I'd found in a dusty drawer, I spread them out on the rickety table. My hands trembled as I picked up the first item, a thick, leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed and fragile. The script was spidery, faded, but legible. It belonged to my great-grandmother, Elara, Her early entries were mundane, detailing daily life. Then a shift. Then I found it, a series of entries increasingly frantic. The cousin, Amelia, gone, vanished from her bed. The family speaks of a wanderlust, but I saw her face before she left, empty. He sits by the fire, eyes vacant, says he hears the voices of the lost. They took his memories, his joy, he is a ghost already. The woods, they sing, not with birds but with echoes, echoes of what was, taking memories. It resonated with the growing emptiness I felt inside, the way my own memories of my wife seemed to fray at the edges, replaced by the horrific image of her decaying face. I picked up a different document, a collection of local folk tales, surprisingly found amidst the family papers. It was hand-bound, crudely illustrated. It spoke of an ancient entity, not born of this world but entwined with the land. It didn't kill in the traditional sense, the text claimed. It consumed. It devoured memories, emotions, the very essence of a person, leaving behind an empty vessel, a husk. It drew power from grief, from loss, from the echoes of what once was. Its domain was the deep woods, the forgotten places, and it had a particular hunger for those of certain bloodlines. My bloodline. The text described how it would subtly warp reality, twisting perceptions, making its victims doubt their own sanity before it finally took them whole. I reread the passage about the entity preying on specific bloodlines. My family. Eleanor's entries, the disappearances, the madness. It wasn't just my grief. It was an inheritance, a curse. A sudden sharp rap echoed from the cabin's single window. My head snapped up, heart leaping into my throat. It was just the wind, I told myself, a branch tapping against the glass. But the sound had been too distinct, too deliberate. I saw nothing. Only my own reflection, pale and terrified, staring back at me. Was it out there? Had it followed me? Or had it always been here, waiting deep in these woods, a silent predator observing its prey? The words on the brittle page blurred, then sharpened, then blurred again. The weaver of silence, taking memories. The phrase snagged on something raw inside me, a hook pulling at the fragile threads of my own past. My wife's face, once so clear, now shimmered with an unsettling translucence at the edges of my mind. Her laugh, a melody I'd replayed 1,000 times, felt muffled, like listening through thick glass. What remained vivid was the chilling image of her decaying face, the one I'd glimpsed in the manor's cursed mirror, a monstrous overlay that clawed at the truth of her. Had it always been like this? Was I forgetting her, or was something actively stealing her from me, replacing her with that horror? A sudden, sharp crack echoed from the floorboards above, directly over my head. It wasn't the settling groan of old wood. It was a deliberate sound, like something heavy dropped, then dragged. My skin prickled. I clutched the folktale document, its rough paper digging into my palm. I had been alone in this vast, decaying manor for what felt like days or perhaps only hours. Time had become a fluid, mocking concept. I stood, my knees protesting the sudden movement. My stomach churned. I had to get out. I couldn't stay here, not while my own history was being picked apart, memory by memory. This place was a cage, but it was also a thief. I stumbled through the manor's labyrinthine halls, each corridor seeming longer, the doorways multiplying, twisting. Panic began to claw at my throat. I pushed open what I thought was the front door, expecting the gravel path, the overgrown drive. Instead, I found myself in a dense, suffocating patch of woods. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine needles pressing in on me. The manor, with its looming gables and broken windows, was gone. Disoriented, my breath ragged, I pushed through the undergrowth. My coat snagged, twigs lashed at my face. I walked or ran for an indeterminate time until the trees thinned slightly, revealing a small, dilapidated structure. It was a cabin in woods, no cell signal, car won't start. My car. My old sedan, dusty and forlorn, sat parked by the cabin's sagging porch, exactly as I'd left it at the manor, or so I thought. A surge of relief, potent and irrational, flooded me. Escape. I fumbled for the car door, pulling the handle. I slid into the driver's seat, jamming the key into the ignition. It turned with a hopeful grind, then sputtered, coughed, and died. Again and again. Completely. The cabin door, ajar, beckoned with a faint, yellowish light from within. A false comfort. I climbed out of the useless car, my legs stiff, and pushed the door open further. The single room inside was small, cramped, and filled with a suffocating dust. A rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a sagging cot in the corner, nothing else. No books, no personal effects, just the bare bones of a forgotten existence. I walked to the single window. It looked out onto the same impenetrable wall of trees. No sign of the manor, no road, just the woods, silent and watchful. I tried the back door, hoping for another escape route, a path. It was locked. The handle felt loose, almost decorative, as if it had never truly functioned. I rattled it, then pushed harder, but it held firm. The wood, old and splintered, vibrated under my palm, a low hum that seemed to resonate in my teeth. My breath plumed. I turned, scanning the small space again, feeling a profound sense of dislocation. Had I walked into this cabin, or had it simply appeared around me? The walls felt closer now, the ceiling lower. I felt an immense pressure on my chest, as if the very air was growing heavy, solidifying. My gaze fell on the cot. A single faded quilt lay crumpled at its foot. Beneath it, a small, leather-bound book. I picked it up. It wasn't my grandmother's journal. This was a child's diary, its pages filled with crude drawings and looping, childish script. I flipped through it, the paper dry and brittle. The entry spoke of a girl locked away, waiting for her mother. Mama says the house is angry. Mama says the walls listen. One drawing, bolder and more disturbing than the others, depicted a house with eyes, its windows staring, its door a gaping maw. And beneath it, a single scrawled sentence. It changed again. My own memories felt like grains of sand slipping through my fingers. The cabin's single window now looked out onto something different. Not just trees, but a swirling, indistinct gray like smoke or a dense fog. The world outside had vanished. My heart hammered against my ribs, a desperate bird trapped in a shrinking cage. I turned back to the cot, to the diary, but it wasn't there. Only the faded quilt. The room was shrinking. I could feel it, an undeniable physical compression. The walls were closer, the ceiling lower, the air thinner. Panic erupted, pure and unadulterated. I stumbled, my knees giving way, crashing to the floorboards. I pushed myself up, scrambling to my feet, my eyes darting wildly around the room. It was impossible. It defied all logic. But the space was undeniably smaller, the air thicker, the pressure unbearable. I was being crushed. I lunged for the front door, the one I'd entered through, only to find it was gone. No hinges, no handle, no latch, just an unbroken expanse. I pounded on it, my fists aching raw. No sound. My breath hitched, a gasp trapped in my throat. Had I ever truly left the manor, or was this place merely another room within its endless, shifting confines? My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs, each beat a dull thud echoing in my ears. The world outside the cabin's single window had not just vanished, it had dissolved. The dense woods, the familiar outlines of the pines, the sharp angles of the branches, all gone. In their place, a swirling, indistinct gray pressed against the glass, like smoke too thick to breathe, or a fog so dense it felt solid. It had no depth, no discernible features, just an oppressive, churning blankness that seemed to absorb all light. I pressed my palm to the cold pane, feeling a faint vibration, a low hum that resonated deep in my bones. It wasn't a sound I could pinpoint, more like a pressure, a shift in the air itself. I spun away from the window, stumbling over a loose rug. The cabin in woods, no cell signal. Car won't start. The words repeated in my head, a useless mantra, trapped. The air inside felt heavy, thick with the scent of dust and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet like old blood mixed with decaying flowers. My breath hitched. This wasn't the smell of an old cabin, it was the smell of a forgotten tomb. My gaze snagged on the old writing desk tucked into a corner. My fingers, trembling, traced the ornate carvings on its drawers. One small, lower drawer seemed to stick. I pulled harder, my knuckles scraping against the rough wood. It gave way with a sudden lurch, revealing not just the usual empty space but a false bottom. Beneath the thin plank, nestled in a velvet-lined recess, lay a small collection of objects. A tarnished silver locket, a single dried black rose, and a brittle, leather-bound journal. The leather was so old it cracked as I picked it up, releasing a faint, musty aroma. The pages inside were thin, yellowed parchment, covered in a spidery, elegant script that felt vaguely familiar. My grandmother's hand. I carried the journal to the small, rickety table in the center of the room, pulling up a chair that groaned under my weight. The gray outside the window seemed to brighten, or perhaps my eyes were just adjusting to the dim, strange light. The first entries were mundane, observations about the weather, local gossip, then a gradual shift. Cryptic mentions of the arrangement, the sacrifice, the burden of choice. My vision blurred, then sharpened. I forced myself to focus, tracing the words with a trembling finger. A sickness of the mind, they said, but she knew. The crops failed, the children withered, power, influence, but at what cost? She sought respite, a shield from the coming famine, a way to mend the broken land. A bargain was struck, not with a deity, not with the earth, but with something else. Something vast and hungry, a chorus of echoes from a place not meant to be known. It offered plenty, it offered protection. In return, it asked for an anchor, an anchor. The hum from the window seemed to intensify, a low thrum against my eardrums. I could almost taste the fear in the air. The entries continued, detailing the arrangement over generations. Each inheritor, upon reaching a certain age, felt the pull, the subtle shift in their own minds. They became a vessel, a conduit, for the entity's influence on this plane, a designated host. They didn't die, not exactly. Their memories faded, their personalities fractured, their essence consumed, replaced by the chorale of echoes. They became a living gate. The price is steep, but the alternative was annihilation. We traded our souls, our very selves, for the survival of our line, for the bounty it brought. But the hunger grows, the echoes multiply, and each generation the anchor must be stronger, vessel more, receptive. Receptive, my wife, her sudden illness. It wasn't just grief playing tricks on my mind, it was a prelude. I flipped frantically through the pages, my fingers fumbling, until I found a recent entry dated mere months ago. It was my grandmother's. He is coming. The bloodline calls, the next anchor. He carries the grief, the open wound, the perfect entry point. William, my William, forgive me. I tried to warn him, but the chorale. It twists. It prepares the vessel. The journal slipped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the rough wooden table. My name, I was the next. Not just a victim of circumstance, not just a man grieving his wife, but the designated inheritor. The chosen one. The anchor. A sharp, metallic clang echoed from the kitchen, followed by a low, guttural sigh that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the cabin. The swirling gray outside the window pressed harder, a viscous, churning entity against the glass. It wasn't just fog, it was watching, it was waiting. My vision swam. The air grew impossibly heavy, crushing my chest. I scrambled back from the table, knocking the chair over with a crash. My legs felt like lead. The words from the journal screamed in my head. He carries the grief, the open wound, the perfect entry point. The perfect entry point. They was it already inside. They was this cabin, this wretched place, not just a prison, but a crucible. The air in the cabin tasted like old dust and a faint metallic tang I couldn't quite place. It clung to the back of my throat, thick and cloying. Each breath felt heavier than the last, a stone in my lungs. I had to get out. The thought resonated like a drumbeat against my skull, drowning out the insidious whispers that had begun to twine around my waking thoughts, insidious tendrils seeking purchase. My resolve hardened, a cold, sharp blade. I wasn't a sacrifice, not yet. I wouldn't be another echo. I shoved it open, the hinges groaning in protest, a sound like an old man sighing. The outside air, though frigid and smelling of damp earth and pine needles, was a balm. I gulped it down, feeling the sting of winter in my nose, the bite on my exposed skin. It was real. This was real. The gravel crunched under my boots as I hurried towards my car, parked just beyond the overgrown rose bushes, a tangible, roaring engine freedom. My hands fumbled with the cold metal of the door handle, my fingers stiff. The key slid into the ignition. My breath hitched. I turned it, a choked groan, a series of sluggish, grinding clicks. The battery was dead, or something was. The engine refused to catch, stubbornly, defiantly. It was as if the car itself had decided I wasn't meant to leave. My jaw clenched, a muscle jumping in my cheek. My phone. The last, desperate resort. No signal, not even a sliver. The familiar grid of bars was empty, a stark white X mocking me from the corner, of course. This was a cabin in woods, no cell signal, car won't start. It was a cage, but I wouldn't yield, not yet. I would walk. Beyond them, miles away, lay the road, civilization, safety. I just had to get there. I started walking, pushing through the tangled undergrowth, the frozen leaves crunching loudly underfoot. The light, already dim beneath the thick canopy, began to fade with unnatural speed, the forest floor plunging into a premature twilight. The trees here were ancient, their branches gnarled and twisted like arthritic fingers. I kept my gaze fixed forward, determined not to look back, not to acknowledge the prickling sensation on the nape of my neck. Then, the path vanished. One moment, a faint deer trail; the next, an impenetrable thicket of thorny bushes and fallen logs. I tried to push through, scratching my hands on the sharp branches, tearing my jacket. The woods seemed to shift around me, the familiar landmarks, a distinctive split trunk, a patch of moss-covered stone, disappearing and reappearing in bewildering patterns. I was certain I was heading west towards the distant road, but the sun, when it occasionally pierced the canopy, seemed to be setting in the wrong direction. Or was it rising? My internal compass spun wildly, leaving me disoriented. It was a chorus of faint, overlapping voices, just beyond the reach of understanding, like a radio dial scanning through static-filled frequencies. My ears ached with the effort to make sense of them. Were they calling my name? A branch, thick and heavy, whipped across my face, stinging my cheek. I stumbled, catching myself against a tree trunk, the bark rough against my palm. The ground beneath my feet felt spongy, uneven, as if the earth itself was shifting, reforming. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird desperate to escape its cage. My legs burned with exertion, my lungs screamed for air, but I kept pushing. I had to. Then I saw it, or felt it. The air grew heavy, thick, as if I were trying to move through water. My vision blurred. The trees began to sway with an impossible rhythm, their branches reaching, grasping. They weren't just trees anymore. They were limbs, sinews, an extension of something vast and hungry. A thorny vine lashed out, wrapping around my ankle, yanking me off my feet. I cried out as I fell, my head cracking against something hard. Pain exploded behind my eyes, sending stars dancing in my vision. I scrambled, trying to free myself, but the vine tightened, digging into my flesh. I felt myself being dragged, slowly, inexorably, through the undergrowth, the rough earth tearing at my clothes, scraping against my skin. I thrashed, desperate, but it was like fighting against the roots of the earth itself. The forest was alive, and it was pulling me back. My head spun. When I opened them again, the world had shifted. The dense, choking woods had receded, replaced by the familiar, manicured, though still overgrown, lawn of the manor. And there, looming before me, its windows like empty eyes, was the house. My grandmother's house. I was back, battered, bruised, defeated. Had I truly run for miles, only to find myself returned to the very doorstep I'd fled? Or had I never truly left at all? The thought of escape became a physical ache. I stumbled towards the door, the cabin's cramped space pressing in on me, making my lungs burn. The metallic tang, faintly coppery, seemed to deepen with every frantic breath. My hand fumbled with the latch, slick with a fine sheen of sweat I hadn't realized was there. Outside, the air would be cold, sharp, clean. It had to be. I burst from the cabin's confines, gasping, only to be met by a wall of oppressive silence. No wind, no birdsong, just the heavy, humid stillness that seemed to swallow all sound. Key in hand, trembling, I yanked open the driver's door. The interior reeked of stale air and something else, something cloying like damp earth and old leather. It turned with a satisfying click. I held my breath, twisted further. The engine groaned once, a sickly cough, then died. Each attempt produced the same weak, pathetic sound, a refusal to catch, a mechanical shrug of defeat. My fingers flew to my pocket, pulling out my phone, a dead screen. I'd forgotten to charge it, or maybe it was just dead. I shook it, pressed the power button repeatedly, but nothing. No signal bars, not even a glimmer of life. I threw it onto the passenger seat, a worthless brick. I was stranded, utterly, irrevocably alone in the cabin in woods, no cell signal. Car won't start. A wave of dizziness washed over me, a sickening lurch that had nothing to do with motion. My stomach roiled, the metallic taste in my mouth sharpened, now undeniably blood. My own blood, perhaps, from gnawing at the inside of my cheek. I leaned my head against the steering wheel, the plastic cool against my forehead. Inside, however, a low hum began to vibrate through the floorboards, a sound I felt more than heard, resonating deep in my bones. I knew then I couldn't stay in the car. It felt like a trap, another coffin. The air inside seemed even thicker now, weighted. My eyes darted around the small space, taking in the peeling wallpaper, the dust motes dancing in the slivers of light slicing through the grimy windows. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt wrong. The hum intensified, a low thrumming that seemed to vibrate the very air. My grandmother's journals, the heavy leather-bound books that had become my anchors in the sea of madness, lay scattered on the small wooden table. I snatched one up, my fingers tracing the faded script, searching for an answer, a reprieve, anything. The words swam before my eyes, then sharpened into focus. The Coriol feeds on despair. It seeks an anchor, a mind consumed by grief, a vessel willing to break. The manor is merely its favored hunting ground, but any place of isolation, any soul lost enough, will serve. An anchor, my mind. It wasn't just tormenting me, it wanted to possess me, to use my very being as a gateway. It wanted to twist my grief into a permanent open wound, a gaping maw for it to enter. My hands flew to another journal, then another, flipping through pages, my breath catching in my throat. I remembered a passage, something about a countermeasure, a desperate gamble. There it was, scrawled in a shaky hand, almost illegible, wedged between a description of a terrifying visitation and a list of herbs. A binding, a severing, not of flesh but of connection. The echo must be given something of equal weight, a tether to bind it and then broken, a piece of the self, a memory made solid, a sacrifice of a different kind. A piece of the self. What could that mean? Not my life, not my body, but something integral to my mind, something it craved. And then I remembered. The locket I'd given my wife, the one she'd always worn, the one I'd found clutched in her hand after it held a tiny, faded photograph of us, smiling, oblivious. The journal continued, the words blurring, then snapping back into focus. The circle must be complete, a focal point, a mirror, the true reflection, unbroken, untainted. A mirror. There was one in the cabin, a small, tarnished thing above a makeshift dresser. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum. This wasn't a way out, not really. But what other choice did I have? Stay here and let it consume me piece by piece? I wouldn't. I couldn't. My hands, though still trembling, moved with a new purpose. I needed to prepare. I needed to gather what was necessary. The mirror, it knew. It sensed my intent. I walked to the small dresser, the mirror reflecting my gaunt, wild-eyed face. I barely recognized the man staring back. My reflection seemed to waver, to ripple like water, then solidify, a distorted parody of myself. Was it already beginning to twist my perception, or was this merely the truth of what I had become? The cold air bit at my exposed skin, not the damp chill of the manor, but something sharper, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. My eyes blinked open, a dull ache throbbing behind them. I was in a small, cramped space, wood-paneled walls closing in, a cot beneath me. Panic, a cold, dry thing, began to claw at my throat. This wasn't the manor. I scrambled upright, my limbs stiff. A single dusty window looked out onto a dense wall of trees, thick with shadow even in the faint light filtering through. My breath plumed in the air. I recognized it. The old hunting shack, miles from anywhere, a place I'd sometimes retreated to in my youth when my grandmother's eccentricities grew too much. I was in the cabin in woods, no cell signal, car won't start. I pushed myself to the door, fumbling with the rusted latch. It groaned open, revealing a familiar, desolate track leading into the forest. No power lines, no distant hum of civilization. A fleeting sense of relief, a fragile, trembling thing tried to take root. I'd made it, I'd escaped. The sheer impossibility of it, the blur of the last few hours, dissolved into a vague, disorienting haze. I was out, I was safe. It wasn't empty, it was listening. The air itself seemed to hum with an unheard frequency. The scent of pine started to shift, subtly, to something else. Dust, decay, and the cloying sweetness of forgotten flowers. My stomach tightened. The walls of the cabin, which moments ago had felt solid and reassuring, now seemed to breathe, the grain of the wood swirling into patterns that weren't quite static. A faint, high-pitched whine began to prickle at the edges of my hearing, like a forgotten memory trying to surface. The window pane, thick with grime, began to ripple. A tall, arched window, stained glass glinting faintly in a light that wasn't daylight. The manor. My breath hitched. My hands, which I'd pressed against the wooden door frame, felt the rough splinters give way, not into wood but into something softer, like crumbling plaster. The rough-hewn logs of the cabin walls began to weep, not water, but a fine, gray dust that smelled of ancient paper and forgotten things. The stove in the corner twisted, its metal morphing into an ornate iron railing. The cot beneath me became a velvet-upholstered chaise lounge, threadbare and faded. It was an illusion, all of it, a cruel trick. I hadn't escaped. I was still here, still trapped. The chorale of echoes had merely shown me a dream of freedom before pulling the veil back. My jaw clenched. It wanted me to despair, to believe there was no escape. But I had the locket, and I had a piece of myself it couldn't have. Not yet. I stood in what was undeniably the manor's grand hall, though it was warped, distorted, stretched like a funhouse mirror. The air was thick and heavy, laden with the scent of damp earth and old blood, a metallic tang that made my nose twitch. They clawed at my mind, pulling at threads of memory, trying to unravel me. I gripped the locket in my pocket, its cool metal a small anchor in the maelstrom. My wife. Her smile, her touch, her voice. I focused on those, pushing back against the clamor. This wasn't an escape route. This was the battleground. I knew where I had to go. The hidden chamber beneath the study. The place where my grandmother had kept her journals, where he had documented the pact, where he had tried, in her own twisted way, to understand the entity that bound our family. It was the nexus, the heart of this decaying, hungry house. Each step I took echoed unnaturally, the sound stretching and distorting as it bounced off walls that shifted in my peripheral vision. The staircase, once grand and imposing, now seemed to undulate, the banister coiling like a serpent. I ignored the flickering images of my wife, young and vibrant, then pale and still, that flickered at the edge of my sight. I ignored the phantom touch on my arm, the brush of cold air against my cheek that whispered her name. This was the entity's weapon, my grief, my love. It would twist it, corrupt it, use it against me. I pushed open the heavy oak door to the study. Inside, the chaos escalated. Bookshelves groaned, their contents dissolving into dust, then reforming into impossible configurations. The desk, where I'd found the journals, was now a jagged altar of splintered wood, pulsing with a faint internal light. I found the secret latch, hidden behind a loose panel in the hearth. It clicked, a tiny, almost inaudible sound swallowed by the cacophony. A section of the stone wall slid inward, revealing a narrow, descending passage. I descended into the black, one hand on the rough stone wall, the other clutching the locket. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the entity's rhythm. The passage opened into a vast, cavernous space beneath the house. It wasn't a chamber. The walls here were not stone, but a shifting, obsidian-like substance that seemed to absorb all light. At the center, a pedestal of rough, unhewn rock glowed with a sickly internal luminescence. The chorale of echoes. It pulsed, a silent, ravenous heartbeat. I pulled the locket from my pocket, its weight strangely comforting. This wasn't an offering. This was a defiance, a reclamation. The entity recoiled, a silent shriek tearing through the air, though no sound escaped its form. The chamber writhed. I focused on the locket, on the faded image of my wife inside, on the love that still bound us, even across the chasm of death. This was the piece of myself it wanted, the pure, uncorrupted essence of grief and love, and I would not let it have it. The air grew thick, suffocating. I felt my own memories beginning to fray, to tear at the edges, dissolving into the swirling vortex before me, but I held fast. Could a memory truly held, truly cherished, be stronger than endless hunger? Panic, a cold, dry thing, began to claw. My breath hitched, a rasp in my throat. I pushed myself up, the cot groaning under my weight. Splinters of light cut through gaps in the rough-hewn timbers, painting stripes across the dusty floor. A single, grimy window offered a glimpse of dense, dark forest. I was in a cabin in woods, no cell signal, car won't start. My hand went to my pocket, finding nothing. My phone was gone. My keys were gone. I stumbled to the door, a heavy, unpainted slab of wood, and rattled the latch. It held fast, locked from the outside. I moved to the window, pressing my face against the cold glass. Nothing but trees, an impenetrable wall of green and brown. A sense of utter isolation pressed in, heavier than the cabin walls. I am here. It wasn't a voice I recognized, yet it was intimately familiar, a chorus of echoes that seemed to resonate from within my own skull. My head snapped around, searching the empty room. Nothing. Just the rough wood, the threadbare blanket on the cot, the thin light. But the air had grown heavy, thick with an unseen presence. I tried the car, a desperate, futile attempt. The ignition clicked, word, then died, a flat, dead sound, again and again. They spoke of longing, of emptiness, of a hunger that had spanned generations. My family, the pact. My grandmother's frantic scrawls in her journal, the truth I had unearthed, flooded my mind. I was the next host. This remote cabin, this isolation, it wasn't an escape. It was a preparation. A memory flickered, sharp and painful, my wife's laughter, the way her hair caught the sunlight. I reached for it, a desperate anchor, but the image wavered, distorted, her face blurring, her voice becoming a discordant note in the growing chorus. It was here. It was feeding. The cabin walls seemed to breathe, the timber groaning, shifting. I backed away, my spine scraping against the opposite wall. My breath came in shallow gasps. Your grief. Yourself. My wife's face appeared before me, translucent, shimmering, his eyes wide with an unspoken plea. William, don't forget me. My heart seized. This was its weapon. My grief, my love, twisted into allure. The floorboards beneath me seemed to undulate, the cot rocking gently as if on a restless sea. The scent of pine and wet earth intensified, mingling with something else, something metallic and ancient, like rust and old blood. I opened my eyes. The cabin was warping. The corners stretched, the ceiling bowed, the walls rippled like fabric. The window, once a small rectangle, now seemed to expand, showing not the forest but a swirling vortex of indistinct shapes and colors, a maelstrom of raw, incomprehensible existence. This was its true form, I realized with a sickening lurch. Not a creature of flesh and bone, but a tear in reality, a chorus of devoured souls, an entity of pure, unadulterated yearning. It was vast, formless, yet undeniably present, radiating an emptiness that threatened to swallow everything. My mind raced, desperate, searching for an answer. My grandmother's journals had spoken of a way to contain it, not to destroy it. It was too fundamental for that, but to starve it. It fed on memory, on emotion, on the very essence of a host. If I became a host, it would consume me, leaving only an empty vessel, another voice in its endless song. What if I gave it nothing? What if I became nothing? A terrible, agonizing clarity struck me. The ultimate sacrifice wasn't my life. It was my past, my memories, the very things it craved, the fuel for its existence. If I could somehow sever them, excise them, leave myself an empty slate, perhaps it would find nothing to consume, nothing to anchor itself to. It would be a death of a different kind, a profound, irreversible loss. My wife's face flickered again, clearer now, her eyes filled with love. The entity was offering me a final, agonizing choice: hold onto her and be devoured, or let her go and perhaps, just perhaps, survive. To forget her, to willingly erase the most precious parts of my life. It felt like tearing out my own heart, but if I didn't, he would become another echo, another twisted memory in its chorus. This was the only way to save her memory from being defiled. I clenched my jaw, a guttural sound escaping my throat. It knew what I intended. It fought back, lashing out with tendrils of remembered pain, 1,000 tiny cuts on my psyche. My head throbbed, a searing pain behind my eyes. I saw flashes of my life, moments with my wife, with my family, all rushing past like a river nearing a waterfall. I focused not on fighting the entity but on myself, on the core of my being. It was an act of pure, agonizing will, a self-inflicted lobotomy of the soul. Each memory I pushed away felt like a piece of myself tearing free, leaving a raw, aching wound. The entity screamed, a sound that was not sound but pure, concentrated despair. The cabin bucked violently. The vortex outside the window contracted, then expanded as if struggling against an invisible barrier. My body convulsed, a wave of nausea washing over me. I felt something give inside my head, a profound, sickening snap. A vast, terrifying emptiness opened up where my most cherished memories had been. The noise receded. The swirling vortex outside the window began to shrink, pulling back into itself, becoming less defined, less threatening. The walls of the cabin solidified, the light stabilized. The metallic, ancient smell faded, replaced by the lingering scent of pine. I lay on the floor, gasping, my limbs heavy, my mind a barren landscape. I pushed myself up, slowly, painfully. The cabin was still. It was gone, or at least it had retreated, but at what cost? I tried to think of my wife, to conjure her image, her name. A blank, her face, her laughter, the warmth of her hand in mine, all gone. It was as if he had never existed, or rather as if I had never known her. I was alive, but was this living? I stumbled to the door, the latch now unbarred. I stepped outside into the crisp, cold air. The forest loomed, silent and indifferent. The cabin stood behind me, a silent witness to my sacrifice. The car keys were on the ground by the front tire, glinting in the faint light. Had they been there all along? And what now was I supposed to do? I saw flashes, not of light but of fractured memories, splintered emotions. My wife smiled, then her eyes glazed over, then her face contorting in agony. My grandmother's cold stare, her hand reaching, then her face dissolving into 1,000 screaming mouths. The images were a physical assault, each one a tiny barb tearing at the fragile threads of my sanity. The roar in my ears was the sound of a universe unraveling, a choir of damned souls singing my eulogy. I gripped the ancient grimoire, its leather cover slick with a cold sweat that wasn't my own. My knuckles were white, my arm trembling, but I held on. I focused on the glyphs, on the archaic incantation I'd barely understood, on the sheer, desperate force of my will. It wasn't a gentle quiet, not the hush of a winter night. My head still throbbed, a dull, insistent drumbeat behind my eyes, but the searing pain had receded to a persistent ache. My breath hitched, ragged and shallow. The air in the manor library was thick, heavy, like breathing dust motes suspended in stagnant water. I pushed myself up, my muscles protesting, a dull stiffness in my joints. The vortex was gone. The shimmering, hungry maw that had threatened to consume everything had simply vanished. The library was intact, though a fine layer of ash coated every surface, clinging to the leather-bound volumes, dusting the mahogany desk. The air smelled of ozone and something else, something metallic and acrid like old blood and burnt hair. My throat was raw. I coughed, the sound rattling in the sudden, profound stillness. I felt, not empty but like a space had been carved within me, perfectly shaped for something I couldn't name. My skin tingled. A persistent phantom itched just beneath the surface. There was a tremor in my hands I couldn't stop. The manor itself seemed to hold its breath. The house was not destroyed, not crumbling, but it felt different, like a shell, an empty vessel waiting to be filled. I couldn't stay. The thought was a raw, visceral command, overriding the exhaustion, the fear, the lingering confusion. Every fiber of my being screamed for distance, for escape, for anything that wasn't these echoing halls. I stumbled out of the library through the silent corridors, each step a heavy effort. My car, miraculously, was still where I'd left it, just outside the manor gates. The engine coughed, then roared to life with a defiant shudder, a mechanical gasp of relief. I drove. I drove without a destination, the headlights cutting weak paths through the pre-dawn gloom, the gravel crunching under the tires. I didn't stop until the gas gauge hovered precariously close to empty and the first streaks of bruised purple light stained the eastern sky. I found myself at a dilapidated cabin in woods, no cell signal, car won't start. Rusting tools lay scattered near a woodpile choked with weeds. The air here was damp, heavy with the scent of pine needles and decaying leaves. I tried my phone. Nothing. A dead zone. I tried the car again, turning the key until the battery whined a pathetic, dying gasp. I was stranded. The cabin offered a semblance of shelter. A single grimy window overlooked a dense wall of trees, their branches skeletal against the pale sky. I slumped onto a moth-eaten armchair, the springs groaning in protest. My body ached. My mind, however, was worse. It felt crowded, not with my own thoughts, not entirely. There were fragments, fleeting images that weren't mine. A woman's laughter, sharp and unfamiliar. The scent of pipe tobacco, a child's cry. They flitted at the edges of my awareness like insects drawn to a light. I tried to rationalize it. Exhaustion, trauma, the lingering effects of whatever I'd just survived. They weren't the angry roar of the vortex, nor the seductive murmurings that had plagued the manor. These were different. They felt internal, like thoughts I was generating, but laced with an ancient knowing inflection that was utterly alien. I sent back. Asterisk sent back. Had I not defeated it, but merely internalized it? Had the ritual not banished it, but instead bound it to me, making me its new, unwitting host? I stood, moving to the small, cracked mirror above a dusty mantelpiece. My reflection stared back, gaunt and haunted. But this time something else flickered in the depths of those tired eyes. A spark of something ancient, something that had seen centuries, something that held a profound, terrible hunger. It was fleeting, a trick of the light perhaps, but it was there. And for a moment the reflection smiled, a slow, knowing curve of lips that was not my own. A smile full of teeth and of endless, echoing patience. They was I still William,